You're standing in front of someone who knows exactly how to hurt you, not with fists, but with words. Their tone sharpens like glass. Your chest tightens. Your pulse rises. You want to defend yourself, explain yourself, scream. But you've been here before, haven't you? You know how this movie ends. The more you react, the smaller you feel. The louder you speak, the less you're heard. And in that moment, you realize they are not winning because they are right. They are winning because you're reacting. Carl Jung once said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But what if that irritation isn't random? What if it's the language of the unconscious, the psyche trying to reveal what you've buried beneath your calm? Toxic people, without even knowing it, become the mirrors of your hidden self. They trigger the parts of you that were silenced long ago. They don't just expose your pain, they expose your shadow. And every time you react, you're not really fighting them, you're fighting yourself. Think about it. Why do certain people drain you, while others feel like oxygen? Why do some insults echo for hours, while others vanish instantly? Why do you keep getting pulled into the same emotional storm, different faces, same feeling? Jung believed that behind every reaction lies a forgotten story, an unfinished chapter between the conscious and the unconscious mind. A story that keeps replaying until you finally learn to watch it instead of live it. But to do that, you must step outside the script. You must become the observer. So what happens when you stop reacting? Not out of pride, but out of awareness. What happens when silence becomes your weapon? When distance becomes your insight? When calm becomes your rebellion? That's where the true journey begins. The one Jung called inner transformation. The moment when pain turns into perception and chaos starts to make sense. Because maybe the real secret isn't in defeating toxic people. Maybe it's in learning why they can no longer reach you. Every time you react impulsively, you hand over your inner power, like tossing your car keys to a stranger and hoping they'll drive safely. Carl Jung would call that a moment when the shadow takes the wheel. In Jungian psychology, reaction is the unconscious shouting louder than your awareness. Toxic people intuitively know this. They poke, provoke, and plant seeds of chaos because they survive on emotional energy. The moment you defend, explain, or justify yourself, you're playing their game. And worse, you're confirming their power over your emotional field. Real strength isn't in silence for pride's sake, but in awareness, in noticing that your reaction is the real prize they are after. It's not about being emotionless, it's about becoming emotionally intelligent. The human psyche isn't meant to suppress, but to understand. Jung's depth psychology reminds us that when we observe our anger instead of feeding it, we begin shadow work, transforming instinct into wisdom. Imagine being in a heated argument. Instead of snapping, you pause and name the emotion. This is my pride reacting. That pause is inner alchemy. It's how you shift from being controlled by your unconscious mind to mastering it. That's not passivity. It's the highest form of self-awareness. Think of reaction as a mirror. The more you fight it, the more it blinds you. The unconscious mind thrives in those blind spots, where ego meets insecurity. Toxic personalities exploit that gap, pressing the wounds you haven't yet healed. It's like having a repress here button they instinctively find. But when you start recognizing your triggers as symbols, echoes of old stories, archetypes of the wounded healer, everything changes. You stop reacting and start interpreting. Life turns from a battlefield into a classroom. Let's make it real. Picture your boss belittling your work in front of others. Your blood boils, your chest tightens, classic signs of emotional hijack. Jung would say the shadow of inadequacy is surfacing. Instead of reacting, you could silently take a breath, observe your projection, and later analyze why that sting felt so personal. Maybe it wasn't about the boss. Maybe it was about that childhood teacher who once said, "You'll never be enough." By connecting these dots, you reclaim the energy that was once leaking through reaction. That's emotional alchemy in motion. So next time someone pushes your buttons, see it as a test from your own unconscious. Each provocation is an invitation, not to fight, but to see. The moment you stop reacting, you start revealing the unseen layers of your psyche. And within that silence, something profound happens. The mirror turns inward, and you begin to meet the hidden self behind every emotional storm. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." That quote is not just poetic, it's surgical. It slices right through our illusions. In Jungian psychology, projection is the secret mechanism by which the unconscious mind decorates the world with our inner conflicts. When you're triggered by someone's arrogance, dishonesty, or coldness, what you're truly seeing isn't them. It's a reflection of something within you that still seeks resolution. Toxic people, in this sense, aren't random villains. They are mirrors, uncomfortable, distorted, sometimes cruel, but often the most accurate teachers you'll ever meet. You see, the human psyche is wired to reject what it cannot accept. What we repress doesn't disappear. It disguises itself as someone else. That's why you might find yourself attracted to the same kind of person again and again, even after promising you'd never do that again. Jung called this the dance between the persona and the shadow, the mask we show and the truth we hide. In relationships, this dance turns emotional. You might fall for someone's confidence, only to later call it narcissism. You might admire someone's passion, then resent their intensity. The truth is, you're not falling in love or hate with them. You're falling into the archetypes of your own unconscious mind. In toxic relationships, this projection becomes almost theatrical. One plays the savior, the other the wounded child. One manipulates, the other explains. One withdraws, the other chases. Both feed on the same unconscious pattern, the ancient myth of unhealed love. It's the wounded healer archetype replaying through modern emotions, text messages, silent treatments, and late-night tears. And what's fascinating is how predictable it is. Like your psyche keeps casting the same actors in different bodies, just to finish the story it never could. That's synchronicity explained, not coincidence, but communication from the deeper layers of the human psyche. Let's make this real. Picture a woman who always ends up with emotionally unavailable men. She tells her friends, "I just attract the wrong type." But Jung would suggest she's not attracting, she's projecting. Her unconscious carries an old wound of emotional neglect, perhaps from a parent who was physically present but emotionally distant. The toxic partner merely mirrors that original absence. Each heartbreak isn't punishment, it's a message. Until she recognizes the pattern, she'll keep meeting the same energy in different faces. The pain is repetitive, but it's also redemptive. Because every failed connection pushes her closer to seeing what she truly needs. Not validation, but self-recognition. Now think about your own emotional history. Who triggers you the most? Who drains you? Who makes you feel invisible or small? Those emotions aren't random. They are archetypal. They carry symbols and meanings tied to your unconscious mind. The anger you feel might be your repressed self begging to be seen. The jealousy might be the unexpressed potential you see in someone else. Shadow work teaches us not to demonize these emotions, but to decode them. Instead of saying, "They make me feel this way," you ask, "What part of me is being reflected here?" That's where emotional alchemy begins, turning reaction into awareness. Let's be honest, toxic people know how to find your emotional buttons, often without realizing it. They instinctively sense where your boundaries are weakest. They mirror your deepest insecurities, not because they are mystical, but because energy recognizes energy. You might meet someone who criticizes you constantly, and instead of walking away, you try to prove your worth. That's the ego's trap. You're not seeking their approval. You're chasing an old ghost of unworthiness. Jung would call that the shadow's revenge. the unconscious finally demanding your attention through external conflict. Until you turn inward, the world keeps sending you versions of the same test. But here's the paradox. The same people who hurt you are the ones who make you grow. They drag the unconscious into daylight. Through them, you begin to see the architecture of your own soul, your needs, your fears, your unspoken desires. This realization doesn't excuse their behavior, but it liberates you from it. Because the moment you see the projection, it loses its grip. The toxic person no longer defines your worth or controls your peace. You start to observe them like a character in your dream, symbolic, not personal. That's when individuation begins, when you shift from reacting to reflecting. If you want to turn this insight into practice, start observing your emotions like a scientist studies patterns. When you're triggered, write it down. Don't censor it. Ask, who does this feeling remind me of? Follow the thread backward, to your childhood, to a past heartbreak, to that time you felt unseen. You'll be surprised how often it's the same story wearing a different face. You can also explore this through dream interpretation. Many people dream of being chased, silenced, or falling, all metaphors for the parts of you trying to be reclaimed. The more you decode these symbols, the clearer your emotional landscape becomes. And that's the hidden beauty behind toxic relationships. They expose what therapy calls the unconscious curriculum. They teach you through contrast, showing what you'll no longer tolerate, what you truly value, and who you're becoming. In that sense, toxic people don't destroy you, they initiate you. They force you to choose between reaction and awareness, illusion and truth. And once you choose awareness, you begin to access something rare, an inner stillness that no manipulation can reach. That's the threshold of transformation, the quiet doorway leading toward inner distance, where calm itself becomes your greatest source of power. There comes a point in every person's psychological journey when silence stops being weakness and becomes strategy. In Jungian psychology, this is the turning point of awareness, when the unconscious mind no longer runs the show, because you've stepped back far enough to see the play unfolding. Inner distance isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's what allows you to feel everything without drowning in it. The moment you stop reacting to every emotional wave, you begin mastering the power of the mind, observing your emotions without becoming their prisoner. That's where shadow integration techniques come alive, seeing your triggers, but not feeding them. Carl Jung often spoke about the importance of withdrawing projections. When you reclaim the energy you've scattered through emotional reactivity, you create psychic space, the sacred gap between stimulus and response. In that space, you meet consciousness itself. That's inner alchemy, turning pain into perception. Imagine being insulted, misunderstood, or ghosted. Instead of spiraling into overthinking, you take a step back and breathe. You see the situation not as an attack, but as information. That's emotional awareness at work, a subtle, almost spiritual intelligence that transforms chaos into understanding. Most people confuse detachment with indifference, but true emotional detachment is the opposite. It's caring deeply without clinging. It's loving without losing yourself. The individuation process depends on this balance, knowing how to stay centered while the world pulls at your emotions. Think of monks who meditate amid noise, or athletes who perform under pressure. They don't escape feeling, they expand their capacity to hold it. This is what Jung meant by becoming a vessel for opposites. When you can hold both light and darkness without collapsing into either, you embody psychological maturity. But learning detachment is rarely peaceful at first. The ego panics when it realizes it's no longer in control. Old wounds rise, demanding validation. The repressed self begs to be heard. You might feel guilty for not reacting, or afraid of seeming distant. Yet this discomfort is necessary. It's the unconscious mind rearranging itself. You can practice by observing your reactions in small daily moments. When someone cuts you off in traffic, when a text is left unread, when you feel unseen at work. Instead of reacting, just notice. Each act of noticing weakens the spell of emotional possession. Over time, this practice turns you into something unshakable, someone whose peace isn't negotiable. That's the hidden secret of Jungian spirituality. Detachment isn't escape, it's transcendence. You stop needing control because you finally trust awareness. In that awareness, toxic people lose their power, arguments lose their gravity, and even pain starts to speak in symbols instead of screams. You begin to feel a quiet strength building, one that doesn't need to shout to be heard. And that silence, that calm, soon reveals its true nature. It isn't absence. It's power waiting to speak through you. At some point in life, everyone realizes that the loudest voice in the room rarely holds the most power. True strength, Jung would say, whispers. It lives in the stillness between impulses, in the awareness that not every battle deserves your energy. The human psyche is drawn to drama because chaos feels alive, but calm is where consciousness grows roots. In Jungian psychology, this silence isn't emptiness. It's the field where the self begins to speak. When you stop trying to win arguments or defend your worth, something sacred happens. Your silence starts unsettling those who once controlled you with noise. Think of it like emotional aikido. You no longer resist energy, you redirect it. Toxic people thrive on reaction. They expect your rage, your tears, your need to explain. But calm confuses them. It's the language of someone who has reclaimed their inner transformation. Jung called this the meeting of the persona and the shadow, when what once triggered you now informs you. Your calm presence becomes a mirror they can't manipulate, because there's no hook left to pull. That's not detachment out of arrogance, but mastery born from awareness. It's the quiet revolution of the unconscious mind becoming conscious. You've probably felt it before, that moment when you wanted to scream, but something inside you just breathed instead. That wasn't weakness. That was your psyche evolving in real time. It's what Jung described as the alchemy of trauma, turning emotional chaos into clarity. Each moment of restraint becomes psychological gold. You stop being the victim of projection and start embodying the hero's journey, the inner warrior who wins not by fighting harder, but by outgrowing the battlefield. That calm, my friend, is not the absence of emotion. It's emotion purified of ego. There's a reason calm people seem magnetic. It's not mystery, it's coherence. Their nervous system is aligned with awareness. While everyone else reacts to external chaos, they operate from internal order. You can cultivate this by practicing emotional alchemy. When anxiety rises, breathe slower. When anger hits, imagine yourself as the observer of a storm, not the storm itself. It's a small act, but over time, it rewires your relationship with pain. You stop asking, how do I control my emotions? And start asking, what are they trying to teach me? That's where healing through awareness truly begins. And here's the point. The calmer you become, the more powerful your presence feels. People sense it. The energy of someone who has integrated their shadow feels both grounded and radiant. You walk into a room and no longer absorb other people's chaos. You transmute it. Jung would call this individuation in motion, when the self shines through silence. And in that silence, something shifts. Calm becomes a weapon, stillness becomes strategy, and peace becomes your final rebellion. But there's one more step. One last transformation that turns all this inner power into purpose. Pain is not the enemy, it's the messenger of the self. Jungian psychology teaches that individuation begins when we stop treating pain as a punishment and start treating it as information. Every heartbreak, failure, and disappointment is a coded message from the unconscious mind. It's not there to crush you, It's there to reveal you. Jung often said that what we resist persists, and what we face transforms. Pain, then, becomes the classroom of inner alchemy, turning chaos into coherence. The goal isn't to escape suffering, but to understand what it's trying to make conscious. You start noticing how certain situations always lead to the same feeling: abandonment, guilt, or rejection. That's no coincidence. Those recurring emotions are the footprints of your shadow. They are showing you where your energy is still trapped in the past. The human psyche is like a river. When blocked, it floods in strange directions: addictions, obsessions, anxiety. Individuation means clearing those inner dams. You can start by journaling the moments that trigger you most deeply, and instead of asking, "Why does this always happen to me?" ask, "What is this situation trying to teach me about myself?" That shift in question changes everything, from victimhood to authorship. The process also means learning to befriend solitude. Inner authority is born in silence, the same silence you once feared. When you sit with your pain without rushing to fix it, you begin healing the inner child. You can do this by practicing inner dialogues, closing your eyes, imagining your younger self, and letting them speak without interruption. Don't give advice, just listen. You'll often hear unmet needs that still echo in your adult life: the need for safety, love, recognition. When those needs are acknowledged, your nervous system begins to relax, and your sense of self solidifies. That's individuation in action, the unconscious becoming integrated through compassion. But transformation isn't purely internal. It reflects in your boundaries, relationships, and choices. Once you start integrating your shadow, you stop attracting chaos disguised as love. You begin to sense when someone's energy doesn't align with your peace. That intuitive discernment is the fruit of emotional awareness. It's not cynicism, it's clarity. You learn to say no without guilt, to rest without shame, and to love without losing yourself. These are small revolutions, but they accumulate into something extraordinary: inner authority. The kind that doesn't need validation because it's rooted in truth, not performance. There are tangible practices for this transformation. Meditation helps you observe the unconscious mind as it rises, the thoughts, the emotions, the archetypes that play behind the scenes. Jung called this active imagination, letting the psyche speak through images, symbols, and sensations. You can also use dream interpretation to uncover what your conscious mind resists. Dreams of falling might symbolize fear of surrender. Dreams of flight might represent readiness for freedom. Keeping a dream journal and reflecting on symbols bridges awareness between night and day, between light and darkness within. Individuation is not a straight path, it's a spiral. You'll revisit old wounds, but each time with more awareness, more grace, more calm. Think of it like strength training for the soul. Repetition builds endurance. Over time, your pain transforms into intuition, your vulnerability into empathy, and your silence into confidence. That's the ultimate form of spiritual awakening, not the absence of struggle, but the ability to move through it consciously. The wounded healer archetype inside you learns that to help others, you don't need to be perfect, only present. You embody healing, not by speaking louder, but by living differently. And this is where the invisible crown of inner authority begins to shine. You no longer chase approval, because you've met the self, the quiet, eternal witness beyond fear and pride. You realize that true power doesn't come from controlling the world, but from mastering your response to it. That's the meaning of life in Jung's view: to become who you truly are, not who the world told you to be. When pain becomes purpose, suffering turns into guidance. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start whispering, "Thank you for showing me." Because you finally see it. The suffering that once broke you was never the end. It was your initiation into consciousness. And that's when individuation stops being theory and becomes presence. You speak differently, walk differently, love differently. You move through the world with a quiet knowing, unshaken, but not hardened. Calm becomes your armor, empathy, your sword. And when you meet the next storm, you won't react like before. You'll stand in the center of it, grounded and aware, knowing this truth, that the storm was never outside, it was always within, teaching you how to command your own light. Maybe now you see, the real war was never with them. It was between the voice that wants to react and the one that knows it no longer needs to. The people who once drained your peace were only mirrors, reflecting the parts of you still waiting to be healed. Once you recognize that, their power dissolves. You stop performing. You stop defending. You begin being. Carl Jung said that the one who looks outside dreams, but the one who looks inside awakens. This is awakening, not a loud victory, but a quiet realization that your calm was power all along. You don't need to prove your worth, explain your silence, or fight for peace. You are the peace, and that realization changes everything. So ask yourself, who can still steal your calm? What emotion still pulls you into old stories? And what would happen if you simply stopped playing the role others wrote for you? That's where individuation begins, when you stop being a reaction and start becoming awareness itself. If this message spoke to your inner voice, stay, subscribe, join this space, and keep exploring the unseen architecture of your mind. Because the journey doesn't end here. It deepens into shadow and light, pain and purpose. And in that space of stillness, you'll find something extraordinary. Not control, not perfection, just freedom, quiet, radiant, and entirely your own.